Somebody sent me this the other day, and they were like, Papa God, this really bothers me. Because this person is basically self-diagnosing, yada, 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 yada. So I'm going to take a look at it. We'll go through some of these things. So their name is Zoe. They're a 20-year-old they, them. On Pornhub, I guess, it says PH. For the sake of employment, these are jokes. Okay, so then, okay. So, can we play the audio? I don't think I'm allowed to play audio. So my parents are crying. Why do you have so many stuffed animals? You're almost 21. Well, you're still obviously a child. I have undiagnosed adult autism. Okay, so I figured it's okay. So the reason that they have so many stuffed animals is because they have undiagnosed adult autism. Now, I would like to, not to sound like not to sound too conservative, but the reason that this person that identifies as they them probably has so many stuffed animals is because, honestly, they're a girl. No offense. Mama God has a lot of stuffed animals as well. But I think, regardless of whether you agree with that point or not, let's acknowledge that I have undiagnosed adult autism is dumb. You're self-diagnosing. And this is an important thing to have a conversation about, because I am somebody who's dating the most amazing, beautiful woman in the world. She's a behavioral specialist for a group with adult disabilities. And she deals with a lot of people with diagnosed autism and people who have high-functioning autism. And we have a common misunderstanding of what high-functioning means in society, because we have some ultra-high-functioning people with autism in society that don't honestly need to be diagnosed. They have autism, and it's like, oh, well, now I know that. But they don't need the diagnosis because they don't really need treatment. So high-functioning people with autism still need treatment and helpfulness. Say behavioral specialist. Did I say it wrong? Whatever. People that have high-functioning autism still need help. And so, like, from the government assistant help in some capacity. And this individual is just saying, like, I have adult autism. And they actually think this. I genuinely believe that they actually think this. Right? And then they even say, even in the comments, I had no choice but to self-diagnose. Well, what does the diagnosis mean? What treatment do you think that you need? Right? I'm 31 years old. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was younger. If I never got diagnosed, I manage it just perfectly fine now. If I have it now, when I'm 31 years old, what would be the point of the diagnosis if I didn't need help surviving in life? Honestly, we all have our struggles, but if you're managing yourself, you don't need a diagnosis. I mean, I come from the train of thought that you should have the least amount of, putting pills in your body as possible. That's different for everybody. But, like, you don't actually need a diagnosis. Even if you might have it, it's not actually hurting your ability to function in society. I think that, but either way, I had no choice but to self-diagnose, which you can't do. You quite literally can't self-diagnose. I cannot afford a formal evaluation. Okay, my therapist ignores my concerns about possibly having undiagnosed autism. So here's the thing. First and foremost, you have a therapist. So you can afford therapy, which means I would assume that you could probably actually afford an informal evaluation. You probably have insurance under your parents. This is what I'm making reasonable assumptions here. But your therapist ignoring your concerns about autism. Now, there can absolutely be bad therapists, but I'd make a reasonable assumption they're ignoring it because they don't think that you need an evaluation. What's the difference between autism and adult? I don't know that you just have it as an adult. I don't know. I'm just saying adult autism to be more specific because I'm talking about the context of adults with autism. So, Papa, her therapist is probably her friend. Maybe. I am an AFAB adult, so a formal evaluation probably isn't going to result in an autism diagnosis anyway. Now, I had to look into what AFAB was. It means that they're an assigned female at birth. So they're a for all intents and purposes. Only reason I'm bringing this up is because they brought it up. They're a biological woman. So because they're a biological woman that uses they, them pronouns, somehow that makes them impossible to get diagnosed for having autism. That just doesn't make logical sense. So what really sounds like is this is a person who probably has parents that make enough money to afford insurance. Their therapist is probably not recommending them to get a formal evaluation because they don't have autism, and one of their struggles in life is thinking that they have some kind of a mental incongruence, for lack of a better term. That's what the most reasonable assumption is. This is a child that wants to be a victim and wants to identify with something. And as somebody out there, if you have autism, you should be offended by this, because this person is boiling down your struggles with autism down to something that they feel like it makes them quirky. They just want to be quirky and have an autism diagnosis. That's it. Meanwhile, people who struggle with autism, to you, it means a lot more. That's how I feel when people say, I have ADHD. I mean, I have it too, and it used to be a struggle. Right now, I don't get super offended, but I realize that you're just diminishing people's experiences that have ADHD. You're being an asshole. So I just feel like, okay, you're an asshole. And that's how you should feel. This is a quirky asshole. Look at this. Self-diagnosis is valid because not everyone has access to the funds and the professional. Bro, if you read their comments, you would realize that they do have the funds to it. They do have funds to access a professional. This isn't even an excuse for them. This is incredible. Minors leaving thirst comments on my TikToks. Okay. Struggling to come up with an English score. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so we can acknowledge self-diagnoses are valid. No, they're not. Because they often lead to professional diagnosis. No one knows better than you know yourself. Oh my God. Telling people not to self-diagnose is a privileged take. Some of us can't afford anything else. Like, I understand that there can be situations where you can't afford a therapist. But this person isn't in that category. Admittedly, they're not in the category. And I would make the argument that it's always the progressive individual. It's not the progressive. It's always the privileged young person with parents that have money that claim that they're going through such a traumatic struggle in life. It's always the kid that their parents are living above, like, they're like upper middle class, like middle to upper middle class, that are like, I have this, that, and the other thing. And you don't want to know why? It's because it's because, honestly, their parents could afford an Xbox or a phone, and now they sit in their house all day and they just fucking sit on the phone and play like dumb bullshit games on their phone and go on TikTok. They don't have a mental disorder. They have a lack of parenting disorder. People need to grow up, and they're growing up asocial, so they don't know how to talk to people. And that's a big problem with our society moving forward, where like video games are put into the forefront. I'm not saying video games are bad. I'm saying that we have less and less forced interaction of people, and it makes it difficult for people to actually empathize and like actually acknowledge the existence of other tangible, real people. It's just so crazy. Look at this. Self-diagnosis is a very important step in getting help. Not for nothing, but if you're an adult with autism and you haven't gotten diagnosed, you probably don't need the diagnosis, especially if you come from like a privileged household. And I say privileged is like just a normal middle class fucking household that can afford diagnosis, because obviously you were able to get through life. Now there are outliers in some cases. I'm wrong, but this person is not the outlier. There's somebody that could afford a therapist their entire life, and they're just deciding to say that they couldn't, and that like they're the victim of circumstances when they're not. Don't listen to these people. There's a difference between self-diagnosis based on research when you have no... Bro, you want to know what the big problem with self-diagnosis based on research is, especially nowadays, is like I said before, we're becoming so antisocial that people are now interpreting that antisocial behavior from growing up like being online exclusively to having legitimate autism. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. And so now it's like, oh, I'm antisocial because I just played video games all day. That's not the same as like somebody who has like the inability to like whatever struggle like people with autism have specifically. I don't want to misrepresent the struggle, but like having it's not the same, but they're similar in the sense so that like, you can oh my God, I have trouble connecting with people. Yeah, that's me. Well, yeah, that's because you're sitting at home all day. That's why. It's crazy. Like, oh, I don't have any money. You don't have any money. How much should these stuffed animals cost with all these Funko Pops? You want to say like that's not relevant? Yes, it is. Totally. You have nice furniture. You have like, it looks like a stereo down here, like an actual big speaker, which means you probably have an instrument. You have all these stuffed animals, which looks like they're from fucking FYE and super expensive. Funkos are anywhere from $10 to $14 a pop. You have a ton of books. You have really nice stuff. You can afford a therapist appointment. And again, your therapist appointment, your therapist literally is probably saying you don't need to go and get an autism diagnosis. You're just go touch grass. Go touch grass. Go outside, play with people. Well, you can't. Well, you're 21 now. Go outside, get some real friends, and actually do something. Just go do something. Look, this thing is really expensive. These things are very expensive. I don't have the money to get diagnosed. Things like $40. You have like 20 Funko Pops here. It's like $250. You're holding like $80 worth of toys in your hand right now. Like, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. And it's funny because I have a lot of people in the chat that have autism. They're like, yeah, this person's insane. Sorry for misgendering them. Zoe. Fucking dumb. So very dumb. Yeah, imagine being in a wealthy family and then complaining about how like you're not privileged enough. Like, what is privilege to people nowadays? Privilege is just like a word that we say regardless of how well we are or not doing. You notice how the people who are objectively less privileged talk about how like they're very privileged in this country. They'll be like, yeah, I don't have a lot to my name, but like I have the ability to get more. They're like, I'm privileged to be in this country. But then the people who have everything handed to them, they're like, I'm not privileged. And like there are people in this country that are legitimately like disprivileged and like do not have the access to particular like opportunities. But they're not the ones who complain online. It's always, honestly, the fucking white person that does it. It's always like the fucking progressive white person that's like, oh, I'm not privileged. Shut up.